I call to order the Village of Riverside Planning and Zoning Commission regular meeting for Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. Could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Graham?
Present.
Commissioner Braun?
Here.
Commissioner Matthews?
Here.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Here. We have a quorum. The first item of business is the approval of the meeting minutes of the September 24th, 2025 Planning and Zoning meeting. Is there a motion?
I move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Does anyone have any changes to the minutes? Hearing none, could you please call the roll?
Commissioner Graham?
Aye.
Commissioner Braun?
Aye.
Commissioner Matthews?
Aye.
Chairperson Hennigan?
Aye, motion's approved. There is no one present to speak, and so we can move on to the village liaison report.
I do not have an update for you.
All right, moving right along to our discussion regarding vacation rentals in the residential zoning
Oh,
district.
thank you very much. So this is, I gave you quite a bit of background information in the memo that was provided with the agenda materials, so I'll try to briefly summarize that. In response to a citizen request, the board directed PZC to consider allowing vacation rentals in residential zoning districts, so we'll get into the current standards in just a second. A little bit of background information. Prior to 2013, the village code didn't allow bed and breakfast or vacation rentals. In 2013, there was a central business district plan that supported the establishment of bed and breakfast, especially in the central business district. And the thought was, with the lack of hotels in the area, this would give an opportunity for visitors and perhaps family members who wanted to host out-of-town guests an opportunity to have where to stay. It would also give the opportunity to folks who own maybe larger houses and especially like landmark structures with the coach houses where you can have residential in the back to use those for commercial use and provide a little more income. So in 2013, the board approved bed and breakfast by right in the business districts and by special use in the residential districts. As far as I know, we haven't had an application for a bed and breakfast, and certainly not since I've been with the village for the past 3 years. In 2015, staff became aware of a few different vacation rentals. Another term would be short-term rentals, so an Airbnb-style rental in the village, and notify those owners that that was not an approved use because it wasn't spoken to in the code. The code just didn't say anything about them at all. So after notifying them that they were a prohibited use, the board asked PZC to consider allowing those in which zoning districts. So there was quite a bit of discussion. The Planning and Zoning Commission came up with recommendations that were effectively very similar to the B&B regulations. And that was the recommendation, is the use standards would be basically very similar to B&B with the exception of some food handling standards. And the board approved, or the PZC recommended that they would be approved in the business districts by right and in the residential districts by special use. And that was the recommendation. When it got to the board felt that was too restrictive. And so they said they can be approved by right in any zoning district as long as they meet the standards. So just as a reminder, when we have a by right or are permitted in our, and we'll take a look at the table in the code, if you have a right that's permitted, a use that's permitted by right in a zoning district, you don't have to go through any special zoning approvals. You can get whatever building permits you need to have that right, and as long as you meet whatever standards may be listed for that use, you can use the land for that use. A special use would be something that may be appropriate for the district but needs additional consideration, given any nuisances that may affect neighboring properties. So one of the examples we use in the commercial districts is having a restaurant with a drive-through would require a special use in the central business districts that would have an impact on neighboring properties. So in any case, that is a process that goes to Planning and Zoning Commission with ultimate approval by the village board. But the board decided that use by right was acceptable. In 2016, there was an application. There was one vacation rental that got a permit. They were operating in the village, and they said they were very successful. In 2017, they came to the board to ask to expand the number of days that they could operate. And it was a limitation of 60 rental days, so you could have 32-day weekends that you could rent out a year. They said they had already booked, their limit on 2016, 2017, by June of 2017, they were already booked for the whole year and said, hey, can we have additional rental days? They came to the board asking them to make that change to the code. When they came to the board to make that change, a number of neighbors came to the meeting and said that they actually found the rental very disruptive and had complaints about the rental. And I'm not sure, that's the extent of what I understand from the meeting notes. In any case, there was quite a bit of discussion after that. In 2017, the board repealed the 2015 vacation rentals ordinance, which effectively, and then made amendment to the code. So vacation rentals are currently allowed by special use in the business districts only. So in the residential zoning districts, which is the majority of the village, you can't have a vacation rental. And this is the current status. You can see the use table here for different types of rentals. The B indicates our business districts. These are the various business districts. B2 is the central business district downtown. B1 is Harlem and Ogden. And then the residential zoning districts are here. So you can see you can have a bed and breakfast is P, which is permitted by right in the business districts, and special use in the residential districts. In vacation rentals, special use would be required to have a vacation rental in the business districts, and it just would not be allowed in the residential districts. We don't have any licensed bed and breakfast, hotels, motels, or vacation rentals in the village. We have had a few questions about them in recent years, folks looking to buy properties and asking, we have vacation rentals, are short-term rentals allowed? But probably I would say less than 5 questions about that. That I'm aware of since I've worked for the village the past 3 years. And there was one single-family house that was offered in the R1A district as a short-term rental that we saw advertised, and 2 multifamily units in an otherwise rental building on Harlem Avenue, 2 rental buildings, 1 unit each, owned by the same company. We're offering those as short-term rentals. So those are the violations that I'm aware of. But otherwise, we're not aware of any short-term rentals. Now, short-term would be less than 30 days, or 30 days or less. Long-term, you can rent your house or apartment for whatever term, as long as it's more than 30 days, and the village doesn't regulate that. So just to take a look at a consideration of the current standards. So these are vacation rental standards. This isn't all of them. All of them were listed in the packet. These are the ones I thought might be most relevant for our discussion. And a lot of communities have different variations on how you do this, but all of these are meant to eliminate the negative externalities that might occur from having a vacation rental in your neighborhood, and that discourage folks from buying a property just as an investment. So the rental must be the owner's primary residence, obviously, is one of the big ones to decrease the idea, or to eliminate the idea of someone just from out of state or out of the area or even in town buying something and just renting out a property as a short-term rental. The owner does not need to be on the property while it's rented, so theoretically you could, if you travel a lot, you could rent out your home. There must be a manager located with a 30-mile radius while the vacation rental is being used. We have to have their contact information. That has to be posted in the rental. The rental cannot have more than 2 guest rooms and up to 6 guests. The minimum rental period is at least 24 hours, so you can't have partial day rentals. And as I mentioned earlier, it can be rented for up to 60 days in a calendar year. So if you had 3-day weekends, you could do 20 of those each year. You can't, if you had a large house, or I guess even a smaller house, you can't divvy up the house to rent out different portions to different folks. Outdoor activities are not allowed between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Then the quiet hours have to be posted in the rental. And that tracks with the village's noise ordinance, which basically says that between 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. you're not supposed to have loud music or yelling or shouting that disturbs folks. And then wrapping up the rest of the standards, you have to have overnight parking, must be on site or at another approved location. Again, these are standards for vacation rentals, which are currently only allowed in the business districts. So this is more likely to happen where you wouldn't have on-site parking in maybe a condo or something. The property can't be rented for weddings, conferences, parties, or other events, regardless of the number of attendees. And that was, I think, directly in response to the issues with the other rental property back in 2017. The rental on the property must comply with all the village codes, and a violation of that could result in suspension or revocation of a license, and mandatory suspension or revocation if there's more than 3 violations in a year. Included in your materials were a couple of recommended standards for your consideration for the residential districts. I did a little revision to that, and I wanted to consider and discuss these with you. So if the commission is inclined to recommend approving vacation rentals as a use in the residential districts, I would recommend generally maintaining the current standards with some revisions. So I'd like to discuss the limitation of the 2 guest rooms and 6 total guests. 6 may be the right number. 2 rooms may be slightly too much of a limitation for people to be able to take advantage of it, but it's, I think, worth discussing. I would recommend requiring a special use permit. That seems to me a good way to let neighbors know what could potentially happen, and give them an opportunity to weigh in. The one caveat is I would say the special use permit requires a written notification within 250 feet of the subject property currently. I included a couple of examples in the packet of what that would look like in terms of just a random property that I picked. And one of the comments that came up during the discussion when in 2017 about the rental property was a lot of folks felt that there wasn't sufficient notice. Now, they weren't required to give any kind of notice because it was permitted by right at that point. So the special use permit wasn't required, but specifically folks said, really, if you're gonna have a rental property in the neighborhood, 500 feet is a more appropriate notice requirement. So if you put an application in within 500 feet of your property, the idea is we would make a list for you of all those properties. You would send out written notice of the meetings that are coming up so that folks can have an opportunity to discuss it and come to the meeting. This is a small detail, but I think one that would be overlooked. Require backdoor trash service. So you can currently, through Flood Brothers, either take your trash cans to the street or they can come pick it up for you. If you have a rental property and you're not on site, to make sure that those trash cans are taken out or taken back. That just seems like a thing that, we don't want the trash cans left out. So that could be a requirement. We could require an annual written notification to neighbors with the manager's info. If we have a property that allows vacation rentals, and we don't have, those aren't very frequent, so we're not in a resort community where folks would know, oh, that's a vacation rental property, I know where to look for the information to call up and make a complaint about it. My thought was for folks who maybe they're there for a while or the neighbors, just a written notice to the neighbors, hey, there's a rental property at this address. This is the person you contact in case there's a problem. Here's the manager's name and phone number. Having that notification sent out each year means that we're current on who that manager is and their contact information, and also notifying new neighbors of the situation and making sure that they have that information available to them. So if there is a problem, hopefully they're reaching out to that manager first and not contacting the non-emergency police number. The other consideration is a separation requirement. Some communities do a cap on the number of rentals that you can have in a community. Other folks do a separation requirement. Some communities do both. So just to consider what that might look like in some numbers that are available. So I just picked a random property on Addison and kind of measured out, and you can see the distance here. This is approximately the center point of the block, and you've got 650 feet here to 500 feet here. So that's approximately the length of that block, an average block, and then the distance here to the neighboring block. This seems like an awfully large distance requirement. So if the distance requirement was something like 750 feet, you could effectively have kind of one house per block. If you reduced that to something like 350 feet, you can see approximately that you could have this rental property and maybe in one approximately here. You could have rental properties here. You probably wouldn't have them here, but they could be in this area. So it gives you an idea of kind of a couple of separation requirements. If you're interested in that, we can pick out a few different numbers and I can pull up a few different examples for you, but that's just a starting point for a thought of a requirement that you might want to consider. Another thought is, this assumes if you approve or allow them in all the residential districts. One consideration is that we have areas of, like I mentioned on Harlem Avenue, that are multifamily buildings in the residential districts. It may be that if we have a separation requirement, that would eliminate having multiple units in one building or multiple buildings in an area, so you don't have a kind of an area concentrated of rental properties. So that's a consideration. It may be that you think it's only appropriate that they're in single-family homes or two-family homes. They may not be appropriate in multifamily homes, depending on your consideration of that. But that's just some food for thought. So I know that's a lot, but if you have any comments or questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I'll start with a question. So I know Airbnb started out really as a way for homeowners to rent out a spare bedroom for a few nights, make some extra cash, but now it's much more catering to people who are renting out entire homes or entire units. So in that context, what does 2 guest rooms mean?
So that, when they put the limitation in there, that would be basically, you could rent out 2 of the rooms in your home. So if you had a 3-bedroom home, you could advertise it for, this is a 2-bedroom rental. That's why I think it should probably be reconsidered.
Yeah.
Especially if part of the goal is to allow, I'm not sure that the problem or the complaints that came before for the rental property was that it was a very large house that was being rented out. It was being rented out to a large party, and I don't think there were any limitations on the number of folks. So you'd have a large number of people showing up for, they said college reunions, a number of weddings, events, things like that. And that's why weddings, I think, were mentioned specifically. So I think a limitation on the number of guests is reasonable. But if you have a large house, I think limiting it to 2 guest rooms or even 6 people might be slightly too limiting to folks, especially if you have the other controls on this, which is don't make noise, after, a certain hour, things like that.
So are you suggesting that that the reference to the guest rooms or the number of guest rooms should be removed?
I think 2 guest rooms is too limiting. I think that people can, I think an occupancy limit makes a lot more sense to me in terms of just total number of people. Whether that's 6, 8, 10, whatever the commission thinks is reasonable for a single family location. I think, and also there's the consideration of some spaces may be bigger than others, right? So we've got the example of the rentals on Harlem Avenue were units in a multifamily building. They were formerly rentals. One, I think they're both 2 bedrooms, but if the occupancy limit is based on, in some communities it gets pretty fine-grained. You can go like a bedroom has to be this minimum number, this minimum size. You can have so many guests per bedroom that you have, and then they have special conditions for children. So you could say, you can have 2 guests per bedroom, as long as the bedroom meets the standard size, and then children under the age of 12 aren't counted towards that total number. That's pretty fine-grained and a little bit more difficult to enforce. I think it's a little bit easier to just put a maximum occupancy limit rather than getting into number of guest rooms, children, things like that. But if you have a high occupancy limit, like 10 folks, and then you have a 2-bedroom unit, that may be, too many people to have in that size of space. If it would be easier, we can kind of go through the current standards and say if they're reasonable or not.
Yeah.
I just want to, I don't want to jump ahead here, but I'm kind of curious, I'm kind of wondering if we shouldn't just kind of get a temperature of the room on what everyone's thoughts are before we even
Of course.
embark on anything else, because I have fairly strong feelings about this, and
Please.
they might be shared, and if they are, then, we may not even need to go there.
Of course.
So
I think that's a great idea.
I'll start. Is this part of the discussion? Do we have to do anything? Or
No.
Okay. I remember the debacle, with the previous Airbnb when that happened, and it was a mess. It just went crazy. And I think at that point, the village did the right thing by saying, we're just going to limit this type of stuff to the central business district, and we're going to impose stricter rules and so on and so forth. And the idea of now, not going back, because I think if it did happen, it would be better organized, with more rules and regulations. But I'm really dead set against having a vacation rental, or whatever, we call it, Airbnb, a vacation rental, in a residential zoning district. And particularly in the instant case where the individual owns a duplex and is living in one and has said she's going to rent out the other. I mean, that's the goal, right, is to have this, however many days we're gonna give them, that's what they're gonna take. And I mean, there's not a lot of duplexes outside the CBD, but there are some. I mean, I can think of like 5 offhand that I know of, and there's probably more. And I just think that, if you're a property owner, you bought your house with the expectation that you're living in a residential area. You did not buy the house with the expectation that the village can, unless you bought before the rules are changed, but I don't think people would expect to have a vacation rental right next door to them. And I don't think they'd be pleased. And so to me, that's more of the other citizens need to be considered here. I think that should be the foremost, what we're looking at foremost. And I think there's a host of other issues that can arise from this, but I'm just, if people want to start building these in the business districts, that's fine. There haven't been any yet, which suggests to me that there's not a lot of demand. But let them do that, and then we can revisit if it really is super popular.
Thanks, John.
I'm in agreement with that, actually, and I'm glad that you proposed that threshold question. I do agree that when somebody purchases a property in the residential district, they have an expectation that there is not going to be a transient property next door to them or down the block. I think that this has already been asked and answered in the village. I don't know what, if anything, has necessarily changed in the 9 years since we last revisited this, but I agree with Commissioner Matthews.
So I personally don't have an extremely strong feeling against it, but the last time this came up, 300 signatures of residents said no. And we could say, well, the specifics of that particular rental and it's better regulated, but I don't know their rationale for it. I just know that 300 people signed on that said they do not want them in the village. So to me, that seems like the indicator of how this is going to go again if we tried to change that. So while I personally don't have a strong feeling against them, I think the village does, and I don't see a reason to push something through.
Yeah, I feel like I've got a little bit more of a middle of the road or nuanced view of it. I mean, I think in the extreme it's disaster, right? I mean, I recall the stories that you were talking about, the Animal House on Michaud or whatever. What a nightmare it was. At the same time, I think the way the standards are written as it is, it kind of by default excludes these as a commercial endeavor, right? I mean, to have a requirement that it is your primary residence and it can only be 60 or 30 days a year.
60 days, yeah.
And you have to be the manager, which at that kind of a scale, there's probably not a commercial manager. The manager is probably the homeowner, has to be within 30 miles of it. I mean, it almost, by the time you check all these boxes, there's probably one or two structures even, or one or two situations that, would even be, that would check all those boxes. And I've had to try to find supplemental or temporary housing, one for my own family when, we renovated our house and we had to move for a little while. Sure. Even finding a rental for any number of days was next to impossible. I mean, it's just the way, the market in Riverside is. There aren't rent homes, it's not that type of a market. But then also being a transplant to Illinois myself from far, far away, family comes to visit and we've got to park them all the way in downtown Chicago or out at Oak Brook. So I could see, God, that'd be great if there were a short-term type of solution. So I think between the reality of it and then just the kind of property rights and the expectation of not living next to Animal House. I mean, and that is certainly important, and I've suffered with, undesirable neighbor situations, so I can certainly appreciate that. But at the same time, I think there's going to be a situation where it makes sense, where it's okay, right? And is that what the special use permit process is for? Is that what the notification of the neighbors is for? And, in terms of radius, 250 versus 500 feet, I mean, that 500-foot radius, it would give the voice to a vast majority of people that are going to be impacted by the externalities of it. So, I mean, I think in terms of, is it a special use situation where there are standards to be met, and as a community we can kind of stipulate what those standards are, under what conditions it's okay? I mean, I kind of feel like that's kind of what we're here to do, is to figure that out, as opposed to just say, no, it's not going to happen.
Right, so, I certainly understand the economic benefits for an individual homeowner to list their property as a vacation rental, but I really don't think that allowing short-term rentals does anything to promote the safety or comfort of our residents. We already have the possibility for a bed and breakfast within a residential neighborhood through the special use process, which does have some state regulations that go along with it in addition to the village regulations. So there are a lot of guardrails there, but really a key difference is that with a bed and breakfast, you have on-site management. And for most short-term rentals, with the exception of those where somebody's just renting out a room in their house, there is no on-site management. So there's no one who's going to be there to actively prevent problems from occurring. So I'm confident that village staff, police, and others would be responsive to any issues that may arise with a short-term rental. It then places the burden on the neighbors who are experiencing noise or parking issues or any other disruptive activities to take time to report those issues and wait for them to be addressed after the fact. So they're already impacted by the time something has occurred. And I really don't think that's fair to someone who, as John said, they bought their house with the understanding they're in a residential neighborhood. And this is really kind of changing the game for people. And then really just personally, I think my biggest concern is that the loss of community that could potentially happen if you have a lot of these in neighborhoods. I like knowing who my neighbors are. I think that's, most people in Riverside probably feel the same way. And I wouldn't be happy sharing my yard with someone who could be, a different group of people every other weekend. So I don't think that the small amount of annual license income that the village could potentially get with something like this would be worth the costs to the residents. So I'm pretty against it, at least in terms of renting out an entire unit or an entire home.
To Commissioner Graham's point, what he said earlier, that there is a need for some of these for certain situations. The village does allow bed and breakfasts. We just don't have any. They do allow hotels, with special use. And they also allow vacation rentals in the business district with a special use permit. I think that's sufficient. We have neighboring communities. There are hotels in neighboring communities that relatives can use. And Riverside does allow, we do have an avenue for those businesses to open up shop if they would like. I don't think that the benefits of allowing vacation rentals in a residential district outweigh the detriments.
All right.
All right.
Any other
I
questions,
mean, I guess,
concerns?
so my understanding is that the board asked us to weigh in on this, right?
They did.
And so I guess, would the board be interested in our opinion on the standards? Like, is there two separate questions? One, do we support it at all? And second, if we do or do not, what do we think the standard should be? Because if they disagree with us and they decide to go through with it, and all we've said is no, we have no input on the standards.
Yeah,
So it's just a process question, I guess.
well, yeah, I would just kind of further to that. What exactly are we being asked to consider, I guess, right? That,
It was a very general question. Consider vacation rentals in the residential zoning districts. Consider whether they should be permitted. If they should be permitted, it should be permitted by right or by special use. So it was a very brief description during the president's report. President Pollock said that we'd received this request and asked the Planning and Zoning Commission to consider it.
My instinct would be that if the board does, if we go and say, we consider that we're not fans of it, if they take that and they say, well, you know what, we are, they're still gonna have to come back to us to get to hammer this other stuff out, so it will land in our lap again, because these are gonna be zoning, well, you're gonna create a new section of the zoning ordinance, or at least reinstate a previous section to allow this, so that will have to be all looked at, and then I think would be the time to really fine tune it.
To your point, what I'd like to do is report what you've provided to me back to the board at an upcoming board meeting and take their direction from there. If they would like to proceed, I'm sure I will see you again and we'll talk about this again.
All right. Do you feel you have sufficient
I have
direction?
Great direction. Thank you so much.
I
I
have
appreciate it.
I have a point, though. With regard to the vacation rentals and it being allowed as a special use in the business districts, is there well, I suppose it's sort of a moot point, but I really do like a separation agreement with regard to vacation rentals.
Okay.
I don't want to overly saturate one area with vacation rentals if in fact there are any to be had.
So I'll add to my notes to consider the recommendation of adding a separation requirement to the existing regulations for vacation rentals
In the special.
in the business districts.
In the business
Which is
district,
where they're
yes.
only, yeah, got it. Great, thank you.
Thank
That was
you.
all I had for tonight.
Can I just say something else
Yes,
with the
please.
vacation rentals and it being a special use? Could it be possible right now that somebody that owns, let's say, is the, I still call it the Henniger Building, but what, what's Labara or that building? Those are condominiums.
Yes,
Let's say that somebody owns 2 or 3 condominiums in that building, and that building is in the business district. Without a separation agreement, could they potentially Airbnb out two or 3 or however many units they own?
they would need to get the special use permit, so they would
Right.
need to come before us. I would be surprised if, I mean, just for that example, I understand your theoretical question, but for that specific building, I would want to know what the HOA regulations say
Okay.
about short-term rentals, because many HOAs don't allow them, especially in newer buildings. I would
Then let's
suspect,
say the apartment building where the Mexican restaurant is.
sure, yeah, but without a separation requirement, exactly. Yeah, if you had 2 units next to each other and they both got special use approvals, they could both, operate as vacation rentals without the separation requirement.
Yeah, I was gonna say it too, because I was the president of an HOA board in Oak Park, and we did this too. So most of the multifamily dwellings downtown probably do have their own rules on this. I don't know if you know, do we know that?
For the Village Center building?
Yeah,
the old
yeah, yeah,
100
for any of the condo buildings.
I
if they
don't
have
know
their own
that.
HOA rules
I would
on it.
suspect that if it's a condo building, and especially if it's more recently formed, they, you know, or most condo buildings have considered it, even if they're not more recently formed, you know, and added those regulations.
Yeah.
But if it's a rental building, like the buildings I mentioned out on Harlem, that are just owned by a company and just rented out, you know, they wanted to make extra money and turned a couple of them into, you know, short-term rentals, so.
All right, anything else on vacation rentals? Okay, is there any information anyone has to share? All
I
right,
apologize for being late. I kept running into closed roads on the drive here. I was like, oh,
yes, that is a problem right now. All right, so in that case, our next meeting will be on November 17th, a Monday.
A Monday, to avoid holiday conflicts and conflicts with other meetings, so.
All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Or second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.